want to give you my favorite term, because for some reason this applies to my life, is Dramageddon. All right, welcome to the podcast. I'm actually really excited about today's guest. This is the author of the Writer's Room Survival Guide. She's also been a writer on SWAT, Ironside, and one of my favorite, Cloak and Dagger. This is Niceole Levy. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So we're going to talk about your book, which is, the title says it all, about surviving the writer's room, which I think is so important because you really don't see books like this on the shelf for screenwriters out there who are dipping their toes into this or who are curious about a room. It's really hard for them to access info other than the odd anecdotal tweet here and there. So I love this book. Before we kind of launch into the book itself, I want to get a little bit of your origin story and kind of what brought you to write this.
Sure. So, I came into writing the long way around and with no real connections in the business, right? I was from a small town, middle of the Mojave Desert, thought I was going to be an actress and that I wrote things to perform in, and ended up realizing in acting school that I was actually a writer who could act and not an actor.
That's right? Cool.
And so I changed course and, I put myself through USC, did not go to film school. For those of you who didn't go to film school, that's not a deal breaker. Exactly. And, wrote and kept begging people to read me and represent me. And for 10 years, really.
Were you querying?
I was querying. I had the great fortune of meeting this wonderfully talented writer named Joyce Burdett in my day-to-day life.
Okay.
And she kind of became my champion, and she tried to get people to read me and represent me, but I had nothing. And it sort of good luck with that. And I applied to all the fellowships and basically finally was like, okay, I'm applying one last time.
Really?
The time I got in.
Oh, that's incredible.
Because, anyone who's done the circuit, it's the same essay questions and the same why do you deserve it? And you get so tired of it. But I was like, all right, I'm just going balls out. I'm going to see if I can do it this time. And I got in.
And this was Carol Kirshner's program, correct? Yeah.
Yes.
She's a sweet person.
She's an amazing human. And like the amount of careers she's helped launch just by being, looking out for us and being a great, our Jewish mother, as I like to refer to. And so I got in the CBS program, and that kind of launched me into
That's so cool.
And so, I was fortunate enough to have people mentor me through the CBS program. And then I also did Writers on the Verge at NBC. So I had access to people who could talk to me about what the room was like.
Yeah.
And even then, when I got into the room, there were things where I was like, what do I do when this happens? Am I talking enough? Am I not talking? Am I talking too much? Like, you have all those questions.
Yeah.
And I've had the you look at it as luck or bad luck, either way, to be in a lot of rooms, because so many of my first four shows were all sort of one and done.
Okay.
And, so I've experienced a lot of different rooms, a lot of different cultures, a lot of different showrunners. And Carol was like, I think it'd be great if someone wrote a book about what it's like to be in a writer's room. And I was like, oh my God, someone should write that book. And as I point out in the book, she was like, you should
write the book. Yeah. That's so great. I love how you did it, because you really, you approach it like a job. Because I think writing for television, being in a staff writer, being in a room, it almost can have this kind of fantastical element in writers' minds, because they don't know what to expect, and so their minds can kind of run wild. But you approach it very grounded. I mean, to the point where I was surprised when I was reading it. Everything you were saying makes total sense. You're approaching it like a job. So you're talking about making yourself invaluable. And in any other world, it would be doing whatever you could so that it could make your manager's job easier or whatever. And it makes total sense when you're doing it in a staff room where you're talking about, hey, why don't you let me write that log line for you? Why don't you let me write the character descriptions? And I'm like, of course, that is a brilliant way to approach it, because I sure as hell know I don't want to be writing a log line. I don't want to write a character description. So if you're coming into a staff and you're like, let me help you, let me do all these menial tasks that you really don't want to do, it makes total sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, that was, advice I had gotten. I was lucky enough to get in the programs and I applied it and it worked for me. It's worked without fail. That I try to be the hardest working person other than my showrunner. And, I have great relationships with almost all of my former showrunners because of that. And they've supervised me on projects. They've, recommended me for projects because they know that I'm going to do whatever it takes to get the job done. So
I love how
your asset too.
Yeah. I love how you break down the hierarchy personally of the room. So, first person, second person, who to go to, who can be your mentor, who could be someone that you can go to if you want to approach the showrunner, to not directly approach the showrunner. I mean, it's great. It is that field guide for staff writers, and it has that feel to it. I love that.
Great. No, yeah, that was really the goal. Like, I just thought, I tried to really think about, like, from day one, like, what was it like? What was it like to go to the room for the first time? What was it like to be like, I have a question. Who the heck do you ask? Like, I don't want to seem dumb. So who do I ask? And, that's why, like, I talk about how important the support staff is.
Yeah.
Learned who to go ask by going to the showrunner's assistant and being like, I have a question about this. And they'd be like, oh, ask so-and-so, they can tell you. And, like, they're not only protecting the boss from getting your question, but they're legit
Right.
to a good source of information. And now I know who to ask the questions to.
And from what I found really interesting is you present different versions of rooms, which I thought was great. So it's not all just one big room where they break the whole season, they break every episode. Yep. So you talked about how there's different types of rooms. And one of the rooms that you mentioned that caught my eye it wasn't even a writer's room, it was a writer's hallway.
Yes. Yeah. So that was my first show, my very first show. After I did all this work, learning what was the expectation of being in the room. I got hired on Ironside for my first show.
Yeah.
And Sanzel doesn't love spending all day in a room.
Okay.
So we operated, you're doing all the same work, right? But instead of sitting in a room pitching an idea for an episode, you're in the office and you're coming up with some ideas, and then you pitch it to a couple of upper level writers and they're like, oh, this is great, not that. And it's a different process, but you're doing all the same work.
I just picture you like, I picture in my mind's eye, I pictured you like hammering your way at the keys and you have like an aha moment. And then I picture you like running down a hallway.
That's exactly what it was. It would literally be
That's
like,
hilarious.
I was in my office and like almost all the co-EPs were on the opposite side of the hallway. So like, I'd be working and then I'd be like, oh, wait, what was that thing? I'd get up and be like, what was the thing you did in episode 3? What was that called? And like, because I was going to reference it or whatever.
Yeah.
Each other's door. And like, if I wasn't in the middle of anything, I'd walk to everybody's door and be like, hey, like, do you need help with anything? Do you want to pitch me something? What's going on? And just be of service, right? If you're not tied up in pages. And it's the same work you do.
Yeah.
Room, you just have to make the effort to walk over to people's doors.
I don't know why, for some reason, I kind of love it. I don't know. I was like, this sounds kind of like great. Like, I would love having people just going up and down hallways, actively getting in there and dipping in and out. And I don't know, it just, instead of sitting in a sweaty room, looking at a board going, okay, what do we do, guys? I just think it feels more active for some reason, but maybe it's just me and I think in a strange way. But for me, that made a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that's interesting is, right, it's harder when you work on a really serialized show, because then you sort of do need the group brain to do every step.
Yeah.
I do think that hybrid model that I discussed that John Wells does is terrific, where it's like Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we're in the room for, from 11 to 2.
Right.
And the time you guys are in your offices and you're figuring stuff out.
Yeah.
And if you know where, call me, but mostly you guys are all doing the work in whatever groups you want to. And then when I come back in the room, right, you're like, okay, here's what we got, and pitch it to me.
I love that model because it gives you that work-life balance, because I've spoken to staff writers who they're in the room for 8 hours, then they're at home for another 12 hours. And they tend to not have families. And I start going, wow, I mean, that's your life is your job. And I would
that
say
was mine.
Yeah, that's
was
tough.
mine.
That is tough.
It's hard because you want to prove that they made the right choice, right? You want to prove that you deserve
Right.
You belong there. And so there is a lot of homework after work, right? Even as a staff writer, it's like you left the day with like, okay, we'll figure out what this act out is in act 4 tomorrow. So you're going to go home and you're going to brainstorm. Like, do I have any ideas for what the act out could be?
Yeah.
And you might have something to come in and pitch the next day, or you're going through notes because you're like, I feel like we pitched something and then we went away from it. And what was the thing? So you're reading days worth of notes, trying to find it, or, there's a lot of after hours effort. That's not even the actual writing work. It's just the helping to keep the room moving.
Yeah.
And, as your career builds, that shifts because it's less of that work, right? And it's more of the actual writing work. And it's your showrunner saying, hey, can you take a pass on these couple scenes? I feel like they're not quite right. So you go home and you do that at the end of the day.
It's gotta take a while. I mean, they say usually with any job, they usually say it takes about 3 years before you're really in your comfort zone and can really feel what you're doing and be on your own. So I have to assume it's probably you've got to have probably got a couple seasons under your belt and at least other shows before you're really kind of in there and working pretty autonomously.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think, I'm sure everybody's curve is a little bit different. For me, I was so lucky that I had really supportive upper level writers and showrunners on my first shows. We all know that is not always the case, but I was lucky enough to have that. So people had real investment in my success.
That's awesome.
I got maybe pulled into things that were above my level so that I could see how they worked. And I could see, like, how do we solve this? How do we put this fire out? And that kind of stuff up close and in person. So I'd say by my 3rd season, that kind of experience was being recognized. And my number 2 on my 3rd show was constantly like, Niceole can solve this. Come here, Niceole.
I love that.
Stuff to do.
That
but it took those 2 full seasons of television for me to get my feet under me. And because you need to find out what you're good at in the room, what you're not good at, what you need to work on. And you only know by doing it.
Oh man, that sounds, it sounds awesome and terrifying at the same time.
That's the best way to describe it. It is awesome and terrifying, right?
It's awesomely terrifying.
Because I'll say, for example, right, when I started out, and I discuss this in the book, I'd be in the room and people would throw out these huge ideas for things. Like, what if we did an episode? This is completely BS, but like, what if we did an episode where the White House is crushed by aliens and we're like trying to save everybody underneath it? And I'd be like, what? Oh, wow. Oh my God, that's a whole great big idea. And I just didn't have that brain, right?
Yeah.
Realized very quickly I was good at was we'd be sitting going through the scene before we sent the writer off to outline. And the showrunner would be like, yeah, I don't know, the scene doesn't really have any life in it. And I'd be like, oh, but remember, he knows the secret and she doesn't know he knows it. And so all that stuff is underneath it. And the showrunner like, oh, great. Make sure that's clear. Let's move on.
Yeah.
I was really good at all that emotional stitch work. And then
great.
At the big idea thing over time, to which, before we came on, we were talking about Cloak and Dagger.
Yeah, I love that show.
Season 2, we had a thing where we moved up a whole bunch of story. And then we knew what the last 3 were, absolutely. And now we had a whole, and it was like we were all staring at it.
Oh no.
And I was like, what if we did this? And they were all like, did you just pitch that? Because this sounds like a thing you would hate. And I was like, I think it'll work though. We should do it. And it was like, I finally got to be a big idea person.
Oh, that's great. And the maturity of pitching something that may not necessarily be something that you like, but works for the story is amazing, because you mentioned that in the book, is that your job is to support the showrunner's vision. I mean, that is a Niceole Levy quote. So by having that in there, I mean, you're living proof of it, because I think some people's, their egos can kind of get in the way and they start losing track of why we're there.
Absolutely. Like, one of my biggest pet peeves in a room is, the showrunner will come in the morning and be like, hey, I had this idea last night for a way we could do the heist. Like, I have this idea. Could you guys like work on that while I'm taking these calls? And the showrunner leaves. And the first thing that happens is everybody's like, oh, I hate that. Like, okay, like, fine, let's take 5 minutes and we'll all be like, I don't know. But then got to break that story.
Yeah.
Break it quickly and efficiently so that you have time before the showrunner comes back to come up with alts. So you can try to pitch them off the idea everybody hates, right? But at the end of the day, it's not our show.
Yeah.
So like, we'll all fight the good fight. We'll all try to pitch the versions we think are better.
Right.
Showrunner says, this is what we're doing. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And it's your job to write the best version of it. You don't have to love it. You just got to write the best version of it.
You're getting paid for it.
Absolutely. And in fact, I have a friend named Mick Betancourt, and he was on Ironside with me. He supervised me on that show on an episode. And one of the things he said to me is, just remember, you write the script for free, you get paid to take the notes.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I had a friend.
Kind of true.
No, it is true. I had a friend of mine who told me, he's like, I get paid for the rewrite. So
that's it. It's like, right, you get to have all the fun on the first draft, and then they give you the notes.
Yeah, that's so true. I love that. That's brilliant. Well, I do like the fact that in the book you talk about room politics, because it's a job, right? Any day job's got the politics. So I have to assume writer's room politics, it's got to be like walking on eggshells around certain people.
Around certain people, for sure, right? And like, I think, I will say the majority of the rooms I've been in, I feel like, are very healthy rooms. I have friends with incredibly toxic rooms.
Oh, sure.
But there's always something, right? There's always like two writers who, they can be polite to each other, but they would never talk to each other if they weren't in this room together, right? And
they're not going to the Christmas parties. That what you're
saying?
They're
not going to the Christmas party, or if they are, they're sitting on opposite sides of the room.
Oh,
wow. There's the upper level who thinks it's their job to teach the lower levels their place. Like, there's the lower level who talks too much and annoys everybody, right? There's the stuff. And so
the nervous talker,
right? The nervous talker. And so just remembering that, like, unless somebody is really truly trying to be disruptive, we're all just people, and like, we're good days and bad days. Like, I've had a showrunner who I love just sort of look at us all and be like, what did you do all day? Like, because we resisted, right? We resisted what he wanted us to break. And so when he came in and we pitched it, it was like, what we did have, it was upset about our resistance. But what it came out as is like, did you do any work today? Like, whatever. And so then, right, the next day it was like, look, I get it. I get that you guys don't love it, but I need you to break what I asked you to break, right? And say no more. We will go do our job. Thank you very much. But it happens, right?
Yeah.
Really, people have bad days. So you just got to have some grace for each other and know the difference between, I flippantly said something that might not have been as appropriate for the room, or I said it to make the room uncomfortable. Those are two very different things.
Having grace for other people.
Yeah.
That's such a beautiful statement.
And it's a real skill. Like, I feel like, it's not a thing we all practice in our
no, it's true.
And so at work, it's like, No, I don't get to comment every time I don't like something. That's
Yeah.
not how this works.
Oh man, it's almost a statement out of time. And I hate to say that because it's just the way people don't have patience with each other anymore.
Yes.
And people don't have grace. And so it is comforting to hear that come from you. I want to tell you about, and I don't mean I, I guess I mean this in the fact that I was surprised to see it. The
Okay.
writer's room lingo glossary, for some reason, is my favorite part of the book.
It is many people's favorite
It
part of the
is
book.
hilarious. And these are all real terms, but I want to give you my favorite term because for some reason this applies to my life is Dramageddon.
It's a
Uh,
good one. Sounds
Dramageddon
great.
was absolutely hysterical. So I was like, yep, all right, this is awesome. So at the end of the book, there's a glossary like you'd have with any kind of a survival guide. There would be a glossary. But Nicole put one in there of common or uncommon terms of writers of that writers would use in the room, um, like a shoe barrel or being stuck in a barrel if you have too much of the same thing, like
Right.
you're in a convenience store barrel or something like that. So it's just absolutely hilarious. Can I ask you what your favorite writer's room term is?
So this is probably cheating, but it's the one that as far as I know, made up.
Okay.
I pitched it to the writer's room I was in as I was doing edits on the book, and they were like, oh my God, I love it. And they started using it. Every time we had a conversation about our villain, they started using it, which
Okay.
Vililoquy, which
Oh,
is soliloquy the villain gives. I was like, because now it just
I
makes
love it.
such perfect sense to me. So when I watch movies now, I'm like, oh, it's soliloquy time.
I think that's brilliant. And I'll put a button on this one and be like my other favorite is editing. Instead of editing, you're editing because you end up going to edit your script and you end up adding pages, which is like so funny because I've totally been there. So
Oh, we all have. We have all been there. Where
it
you're
is.
like, I got to cut 3 pages. And then you're like,
How did I
what
get
happened?
6? Like, what the hell's going on? Why is my brain broken? Yeah, so I totally get it. The book is The Writer's Room Survival Guide. I totally recommend it. Nicole, is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have?
Um, I mean, you asked all good questions. I would just say, as a parting shot, it's just for folks that like, if you're really interested in this, whether it's my book or whether you go track down a bunch of podcasts about a room and that kind of stuff, like you really have to look at it as a job that you want longevity in, and you can be a brilliant writer and be terrible in the room. So you have
True.
skill set from being a great writer.
Yep. People skills, emotional intelligence, all kinds of stuff I'm sure is absolutely needed to be in the
Yeah.
staff. And then and I don't want to keep you too long, but it's got to be hard when a show is canceled because now you're out of work and you have to go find a new job.
Yeah, I mean, I went through that. So my first show got canceled on the last day of production of my first episode of television,
Oh, geez.
the day before my birthday.
Oh my gosh.
We're shooting a night, we were doing a Friday. So basically like at midnight, for anyone who doesn't know, listening, that's when you're shooting Friday night into Saturday morning.
I love it.
Saturday. And we knew we were getting canceled beforehand. So we had like great food trucks and whatever, because we were like, we're going out with a bang. and at midnight, they surprised me with a birthday cake. And I was like, well, we're gonna get canceled. This is the way to do it. Like,
yeah, go big.
But it's devastating because you've spent every day for months with these people.
Yeah.
Hopefully you've had a good experience and you're not happy to pack up your office and go.
Right.
And as hard as getting your first job is, the second job can be much more difficult, because especially if you came into your first job like I did by way of one of the fellowships,
Yeah.
or you know, you worked your way up in that particular room, like you were a writer's assistant who finally got staffed and then it gets canceled. You don't have the momentum yet to necessarily jump right into your next job. So
Yeah.
I worked after my first show for 6 months.
Oh, geez.
And I was very happy. I listened to my mentors who told me to basically save every dime I made on my first show. And so I was okay. And I made it through. And then I got staffed on Allegiance at NBC, which not only turned out to be a great job, even though we got canceled once again, but it's how I got my first feature because George Nolfi, who was our showrunner, liked me and liked my work and had me come on board and help him co-write The Banker. So
oh, that's fantastic.
You never know what's going to come from showing up every day and doing your best.
And really creating that network that knows what you can do. So that way, when you end up in that situation, you can at least start putting feelers out there.
Absolutely. And perfect example of that from Allegiance. When I got the phone call that I was going to get a meeting on Mysteries of Laura, I remembered that one of my EPs on Allegiance had mentioned Jeff Rake before. And I was like, hey, like, you know Jeff Rake, right? And he was like, oh my God, we're great friends, whatever. And I was like, well, I'm going to go meet on his show.
Awesome.
I was in the office before he was calling, being like, you should definitely hire Niceole. Like, she's amazing. So it's, you know, if you do your best and you show up, any good, reasonable upper level writers you work with are going to be willing to help you find the next gig if they can. They will write the email, make the phone call, make the recommendation even. I just recently had a writer that I've actually never even worked with, but we have tons of mutual friends in common, recommend me for something.
That's so cool.
So but it's about showing up and doing the work and your professionalism.